My son has autism. 11 years ago, his father walked away. And now he's back because he finally sees something worth taking. My name is Rachel. I'm 42 years old. And I'm sitting here telling this story because if I don't, I think it will swallow me whole. I remember the sound of the door more than anything else. Not the slam. Not the footsteps. The silence after. The kind of silence that feels like it presses against your chest and refuses to let you breathe. My son was 6 years old that night. 6. He was sitting on the floor with his toy cars lined up in perfect rows, colors arranged just the way he liked them. He didn't look up when his father said he was leaving. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just froze, like his body didn't know what to do with the moment yet. I did though. I begged. I didn't scream or beg loudly. I begged quietly, the way people do when they're trying not to scare their child. I asked him to think, to slow down, to remember the nights I stayed up rocking our son when he couldn't sleep. I asked him to remember the doctor visits, the therapies, the way our boy clung to my sleeve when the world got too loud. He said he couldn't live like this anymore. He said he needed freedom. He said he felt trapped. And then he said the words that burned into my bones. I didn't sign up for this. I remember staring at him and thinking, neither did our son. None of us sign up for the hard parts. They just arrive. When the door closed, my son didn't ask where his father went. He lined his cars up again. Perfectly. Then he whispered, too loud, and crawled into my lap like he was trying to disappear into my chest. That was the moment I understood something terrible and permanent had begun. The years after that were not brave. They were not inspirational. They were survival. They were therapy appointments and insurance calls and late-night research and mornings where I cried in the shower because it was the only place I could cry without being heard. I learned how to read my son's breathing the way other parents read words. I learned which sounds made his skin crawl. Which foods he could tolerate, which days would be good and which would break us both. His father never called. Not once. I stopped checking my phone eventually. Stopped waiting for apologies that never came. I learned how to stretch groceries. How to smile in public. How to hold my breath when the school called again. My son grew quieter as he grew older, but not smaller. He watched everything. Noticed patterns. Noticed people. Noticed lies. I used to think his silence meant he was lost somewhere inside himself. I didn't realize he was listening more closely than anyone else ever had. There were nights I sat on the edge of his bed and wondered if I was failing him. Nights I questioned every choice I made. Nights I whispered apologies to a ceiling that never answered back. I was so tired. So angry. So afraid of becoming invisible. And then one day, without warning, something shifted. He started building things on his laptop. Simple at first. Then complex. He didn't talk much about it, just worked. Focused. Determined. I didn't understand most of it, but I understood the look in his eyes, the same look he had when he lined up his toy cars perfectly. Order. Control. Calm. I didn't know it then, but that quiet focus would change everything. Years passed. 11 of them. And then one afternoon, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I answered anyway. And I heard his voice. Older. Smoother. Confident. He said my name like he still had a right to say it. He asked how I'd been. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. I asked him why he was calling after all this time. He said he'd heard about our son. He said he was proud. He said he wanted to reconnect. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Because I knew deep in my bones this wasn't about love. This wasn't about regret. This was about timing. About opportunity. About money he didn't earn and a child he didn't raise. When he showed up in person for the first time, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked polished. expensive, like someone who had been living without consequences. He smiled like we were old friends, like we'd just lost touch. My son stood behind me, silent, still. His father looked at him and said his name like he was testing it. And my son didn't respond. That's when I realized something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. My son wasn't afraid of him. He was studying him. And I knew then, whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to go the way his father expected. Because my son had grown up watching, listening, learning. And he remembered everything. I didn't tell him to leave when he showed up that day. I didn't scream. I didn't throw him out. I just stood there and watched the man who once promised to protect us try to pretend he hadn't been gone for more than a decade. My son stood behind me, quiet, observant, his fingers lightly brushing the seam of his sleeve the way he does when he's processing too much at once. His father talked like time had simply skipped a few pages. Like the years in between were a minor inconvenience. He asked about school, about hobbies, about what my son liked to do now. He smiled too much. He nodded too often. He spoke in questions meant to sound caring, but never waited long enough to hear the answers. And I remember thinking, this man doesn't know my child at all. He didn't know about the nights my son couldn't sleep because the hum of the refrigerator felt too loud. He didn't know about the way certain fabrics made his skin crawl, or how he memorized street patterns just to feel grounded. He didn't know about the meltdowns in grocery store aisles, or the quiet victories of tying his shoes without shaking. He didn't know the years of therapy, the endless forms, the doctors who spoke over us instead of to us. He didn't know how many times I sat on the bathroom floor crying because I was terrified of doing something wrong and breaking my child in a way I could never fix. He just saw results. And suddenly, he wanted a piece of it. He started calling more, texting, asking questions that weren't really questions. He asked about money without using the word, about opportunities, about what our future looked like. I could feel it every time he spoke, the calculation behind the charm. My son listened quietly, always quietly. He never reacted, never flinched, never asked why now. And that scared me more than anger ever could. Then one afternoon, an envelope came in the mail. Thick, formal, heavy in a way paper shouldn't be. I knew before I opened it that nothing good lived inside it. When I read the words legal representation, my hands started shaking so badly I had to sit down on the floor. He wasn't just back. He was coming for control. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. Not because I was afraid of losing money. Not because I was angry at him. But because I was terrified I would fail my son in the one place I couldn't afford to, protecting him from being used. When I told my son, I expected panic. I expected fear. I expected anger. Instead, he looked at me with a calm I didn't understand yet and said, "It's okay." I thought this might happen. I asked him what he meant. And that's when I realized how much he had seen while I was just trying to survive. He told me he kept records. Messages. Emails. Missed calls. Dates. Times. Patterns. He told me he learned early that people who plan to disappear leave traces without realizing it. He said he didn't do it out of spite. He did it because consistency made him feel safe. Because documentation made the world make sense. I remember staring at him, my chest tightening, realizing that while I was busy protecting him from pain, he had been protecting himself from disappointment. When the legal process started, everything slowed down and sped up at the same time. Days dragged. Nights disappeared. I stopped sleeping. I replayed every mistake I'd ever made, convinced they would use it against me. I worried that loving my child wouldn't be enough in a system that cared more about bloodlines than presence. And then the day came. The room was cold. Too quiet. His father sat across from us looking calm, confident, practiced. He wore a look I recognized now, the one people wear when they believe they're entitled to something they didn't earn. He spoke about reconciliation, about rights, about being part of his son's life again. I wanted to scream, but my son squeezed my hand. And then he spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't cry. He stated facts. He talked about dates and messages and silences. He talked about nights when no one answered. He talked about learning early that expecting people to stay was dangerous. He talked about how he built a world where he could rely on patterns instead of promises. He never once said the word dad. I watched the room change as he spoke. Watched confidence drain from a man who thought biology alone gave him ownership. Watched people realize that this wasn't a story about abandonment anymore. It was about resilience. When it was over, when the words had all been said and the truth was laid bare, there was no dramatic moment. No shouting. No victory speech. Just silence. And then a decision. And, just like that, it was done. Outside, the air felt lighter. My knees almost gave out when we stepped into the sunlight. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until it was finally safe to exhale. My son looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw peace in his eyes. He didn't say much. He never does. He just said, "We're okay now." And I believed him. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Healing isn't loud. It's slow and quiet and sometimes boring. But it's real. We walk together now without fear following us. We talk more. We laugh sometimes. We still have hard days, but they don't crush us anymore. And his father? He faded back into the place he always belonged, the past. Sometimes I think about the woman I was 11 years ago. Tired. Scared. Alone. I wish I could tell her that staying wouldn't break her. That loving her child would become the strongest thing she ever did. That one day, the very thing that almost destroyed her would become the proof that she survived. If you're listening to this and you're in that place right now, tired, afraid, holding everything together with shaking hands, I want you to know something. You're not weak for staying. You're not foolish for loving. And you're not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay long enough for the truth to reveal itself. And when it does, you'll be ready. I didn't realize how heavy my body had been until the weight finally lifted. It wasn't sudden. It didn't feel like freedom all at once. It felt like being able to breathe again without counting each breath. Like waking up one morning and noticing your shoulders weren't clenched anymore. That's how the days started to feel after everything was finally over. People think closure comes with noise, with apologies, with some dramatic moment where the person who hurt you finally understands what they did. That didn't happen. There was no apology, no sudden awareness, just silence. And strangely, that silence felt honest. My son didn't talk about his father much after that. He didn't need to. He didn't ask questions or revisit old wounds. It was like once the truth had been spoken out loud, it no longer needed to echo inside him. He went back to his routines, his focus, his quiet ways of moving through the world. But something in him had shifted. He stood straighter. He took up space without apologizing for it. And I watched him with a kind of awe that hurt, because I realized how much of his strength had been built in silence. How many nights he had lain awake processing things no child should have to process alone. How much he had learned about people by watching who stayed and who disappeared. There were days I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. For not protecting him better. For not being stronger when he was younger. I replayed old moments in my mind, the nights I was too tired to notice his shaking hands, the mornings I rushed him through breakfast because we were late again, the times I told him later when he needed now. But he never blamed me. One evening, as we sat together in the living room with the lights low, I finally said the words that had been sitting in my chest for years. I told him I was sorry. for everything I missed, for every moment I didn't understand him, for every time I was too exhausted to listen the way he deserved. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. And when he did, his voice was steady. "You stayed," he said. "That mattered. That was it. No speeches. No long explanations. Just truth." I don't think people understand how heavy it is to be the one who stays. To be the one who absorbs everything so someone else can survive. There's no applause for it. No awards. Just quiet endurance. I thought about all the years I felt invisible. About how easy it would have been to walk away when it got hard. How tempting it was to believe the lie that someone else would do it better. But I didn't leave. I stayed. Even when I didn't know how. Even when I didn't know if it was enough. And somehow it was. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale after that. We still have hard days. My son still struggles sometimes. I still worry more than I should. But there's a peace now that wasn't there before. A kind of earned calm. We go for walks sometimes, just the two of us. He talks about ideas he has, things he wants to build, problems he wants to solve. He sees patterns in the world that I never could. And sometimes he stops mid-sentence and asks me if I'm okay. Me, his mother, the one who used to carry everything. And I smile and tell him I am. Because I am. I think about his father occasionally. Not with anger anymore. Just clarity. I see now that some people leave because they can't stand to see the strength they never had. Some people walk away because staying would force them to face themselves. And that's not my burden to carry. I used to think survival meant holding on no matter what. Now I know it means knowing when something no longer belongs in your life. It means choosing peace over chaos. Truth over comfort. Growth over fear. If you're listening to this and you're in the middle of something that feels impossible, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not weak for staying. You are not foolish for hoping. And you are not broken because someone walked away. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who quietly keep going while the world looks the other way. And sometimes, the ones who leave come back not because they've changed, but because they finally see what they lost. And by then, you're no longer waiting. You're living. And that, more than anything, is your victory.